Hey guys and gals, Mr. Yan here. Today we're talking about ancient India, and really in today's lesson we're going to hit up the very first civilizations, geography, as well as the migration of the Aryans into ancient India, sort of forming the culture that would become Indian culture as we know it. So let's start with the geography, shall we? India, geographically and non-geographically, but in this particular paragraph, geographically is a very interesting place. It's described as a subcontinent, being like kind of like not quite its own continent, but you'll see it's surrounded by water on, well, many of its sides, and it's sort of geographically isolated because of the mountain ranges like the Himalayas, so it's described as a subcontinent. On this northern end here, you have the mountain range. One of these mountains is Mount Everest. There it is, right there, marked on the map. You may have heard of it. At the foot of the mountains is basically rich plains supplied with water by the Indus and Ganges River, making it pretty good farmland. 2/3 of the lower part of India and the central India is called the Deccan Plateau. Basically, there were these mountain ranges and they got worn down over time, and now you have a plateau. And then along the coast you have sort of lush, fertile land. Climate is dictated by the monsoon winds. Basically, in the winter, the wind blows in from the Himalayas and it's cold and dry, and in the summer, the direction of the wind changes and it comes from the Arabian Sea, making it warm and very wet. So that's good for farming. You know, a lot of water is good for farming, a lot of rain, but it can also be very dangerous if you have too much rain and flooding. Let's talk about these first civilizations. As with most civilizations, they began farming near a river. The first settled people of India settled down to farm on the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan. As food increased, specialization occurred. You know, this basically means a surplus of food, so not everyone has to farm, so they can get good at things like making tools or houses or weapons. Basically, then you have villages, and then you have these villages grow into cities. This was about 5,000 years ago. The early Indus people thrived between 2600 and 1900 BC. They had a pair of cities that were very, very similar, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Most of what we know about these ancient Indus civilizations comes from these sites where these cities were. They had, almost every house had a bathroom in it with pipes that ran the waste outside the city walls, so that's pretty cool. First sort of plumbing. Yeah, it's pretty cool. They lived in sun-baked brick houses, so they made their bricks. Government and religion was an important part of society, but most people actually lived in farming villages surrounding the cities. And they made goods of ivory, gold, and copper, and they traded as far, they say, as Mesopotamia. Here's a nice recreation of Mohenjo-Daro I found. Around 1900, however, BC, these cities began to become abandoned. They're not totally sure why, but there's a few theories, like earthquakes killing tons of people. There's a drought that lasted hundreds of years, and it was also this time that the Aryan migration started. What the heck's the Aryan migration? So the Aryans are not so much a race of people, but a broad category of people known as Indo-Europeans. They're named such because they're a large group of people sharing a similar language. The short story of this is that they kind of migrated into India. You can see here the picture. And while they didn't quite destroy the culture that was there, they ended up moving in, and what was their culture clashed with already existing culture, and they sort of melded together to give us what is the modern Indian culture. They were initially moving herders, like nomadic in culture, and they were moving herds of cattle. A lot of it was cattle. They traveled on horseback. They were pretty fierce horseback warriors, and they were on the move, always looking for good pastures for their cattle. Each Aryan tribe was led by a Raja, or prince. Now, as the tribes began to settle down and form new villages and towns and cities, the Rajas basically had their own little kingdoms. They developed a system of writing after they settled down called Sanskrit, which of course they used to record sales, and then literature, a collection of Aryan poems, prayers, and stories is recorded in a sacred text called the Vedas, which is pretty much like, well, now it's part of Hindi culture, but yeah, it was all written down in the Vedas. Here's the writing of the Vedas. Might look familiar. A major part of the culture that developed and stuck in India is the caste system, which is essentially a stratified social class system. There were strict rules for the social classes, and you were stuck in the Varna, or class in which you were born. It dictated what jobs you could take and who you could marry. You can see here that it has a similar makeup to other cultures we followed. The Brahmin are at the top, that's like the priests, and the academics, followed by warriors and kings. Then you have your merchants and landowners under them. Kind of at the bottom you had the Sudra, which are the commoners, peasants, and servants. But all the way, that's not even considered part of the social class system, were the untouchables, which were like the outcasts and slaves. They did jobs that nobody else wanted to do, like clean the toilets and plumbing and stuff like that. Skinning animals, stuff nobody else wanted to do. The untouchables. Family life was at the center of this new Indian culture. They lived in extended families, which with the oldest male being in charge, that means like the grandpa and grandma and then his sons and kids, they all lived there. So big family groups. The oldest male was in charge. Men had a lot more rights than women. Like women generally didn't own land. It usually went to the oldest son, and only if there were no like male heirs would women inherit property. Let's see, marriage usually happened in the teens, so they married pretty young, and there's no divorces, so you better hope you liked who you married. In the wealthiest families, the boys would be educated by a guru, or like a wise man, and this education lasted 12 years, and they could not get married until they completed this 12 years of education. So I guess you can kind of say, like, I'm your guru. I'm your history guru. So feel free to call me Mr. Yun the Guru. I'll allow it. Alright, hey, that's your lesson for the day. I'll be sure to clean this up. I saw some spelling errors. And then go ahead and move on to your quiz. It's going to be a basic quiz today. Make sure you read the book, because there's some fine details that I didn't mention in this lesson. Alright, hey, have a wonderful day. Let me know if you need anything.